I think you'll get to know him as well a little bit through our work that I'll share with you. I also wanted to, because I'm an artist, in a sense, perform my idea just through wearing a dress that conveys the binary of humanity on this side and nature, and trying to embody both of those and overcome those. So I had a friend who said, well, you must just keep switching back and forth when you're speaking for nature or speaking for human systems. And I decided that that was A, too complicated, and B, that is not the point. It's supposed to be cohesive. So we'll see how this goes. If I start doing this, it's because I'm possessed.
I love it.
I would, did I flip too quickly? Sorry for that. This binary that I'm wearing is something we all wear, and across this conference I've heard everyone articulate our attempts to combat that in different ways. The information that I'm gleaning from this conference is quite important in terms of the work that I want to do, and so I'm very grateful to be here. I'm thankful to both Diana Gilday and Jason Moore for coordinating and including me in this. Cesar Lois is a media theorist and a digital artist. We also rely on the collaboration of many others. So we work with students who contribute research and sometimes the nurturing of biological systems. And we also rely on those biological organisms as collaborators, certainly as contributors. In seeking an ecotopian framework, we create experiments that incorporate non-human organisms. We do this in order to better understand ourselves and our societal systems and the values that those systems both produce and the values that are embedded in those systems. We cross microbiological and human systems so that we can reconsider what shapes our human motivations. Along the way, we start to associate more and more with those organisms. And we attempt to think about the systems that we're looking at, both human systems and the broader nature-based systems, in ecosystemic ways that combine both. The organisms that we mostly rely on are fungal or microbiological systems. They are organisms whose networks do what ideal human societies would do. They share equitably across all of the nodes of those networks. They distribute resources equitably as well. This first project I'm going to talk about is called Economic Revolution, eco in parentheses. In this, we compare human societies with the microorganism Physarum polycephalum. Some of you may know this organism. It's known as an intelligent organism because it shares its resources so equitably. It's nice to imagine that we as human systems could replicate that. Certainly we have the intention. So what we did is we took the organism and grew it across different maps of human cities according to the demographics, the growth parameters, and also the wealth distribution of those cities. This is Los Angeles, where we went across Venice Boulevard and placed the organism in the same concentration as the human population and gave the organism resources equivalent to what the people in those communities also have, at least statistically, and those are monetary resources. We also did perform public actions within those communities. So we went to eateries along that route, specifically places where the Physarum polycephalum ate, because we also put oats, which is the food source of choice in the laboratory for this organism, where there are restaurants and cafes and eateries available. And we purchased food there and shared it with people from those communities and talked to them about what is our organizing principle in society and what happens because of that. What is the organizing principle of Ficerum polycephalum, and how are we different or the same? What can we learn from that? This is an example of the distribution. So on the very far left, you can hardly see the culture, the yellow dots, because the population is not as highly concentrated as on the east side. And those of you who've been to Los Angeles, you know that the west side is the wealthier area. And as you go east, the population becomes much denser, and also there's great income disparity. So on the west side in Marina del Rey, for instance, there's only one dot of culture and a little bit more for approximately 5,700 people per square mile. As you go further east, in Harvard Heights, for example, there's 23,473 people, which is the equivalent of almost 5 dots of culture. So you start to have more people / Ficerum polycephalum located in those areas. And yet the income that gets placed on that is disproportionate to the population. So on the west side, the median income in Marina del Rey is $70,000 per person, where in Harvard Heights, it's $14,000 per person, which translates to 1.5 oats, almost a half oats, versus 7 oats on the west side. So it's a fairly simple data visualization to see what will happen in these circumstances. How does a natural system that is equitable in its growth principles, how does it operate given the disparity that we have across our human cities? And there you have the specific key for population to culture. And I guess culture here has multiple meanings. So what we see is when we grew the Ficerum polycephalum across Venice Boulevard, we saw that the population on the west side really thrives. A population that has that many resources does well. It grew quite robust and bright yellow, and the population on the east side blanched. And then, after the population on the west side grew to capacity, what does it do? It begins to spread out further and really mirrors the patterns of stratification and gentrification that we see in human society. At the same time, Ficerum polycephalum, it's a mouthful. If I say it enough, I should know it. Ficerum polycephalum has a different operating principle. It doesn't gentrify. What it does is it grows, and when it links up to another part of itself or its organism, and it is not a single cell, it is not a single organism. It's a network of several single-celled individuals. When it links up and completes the network, it redistributes its resources and only grows to capacity. It will not overgrow what it can support. We did this experiment in different cities. We did it in Palo Alto and in East Palo Alto, which, as you know, for those of you who live here, has one of the world's greatest income disparities. We also did it in 2 different neighborhoods here in Durban, where this compared an all-black Zulu neighborhood to a more affluent, integrated university neighborhood. And we didn't just try to do this experiment. We also went to the neighborhoods and collected stories and talked to people and asked them how they made and shared food. And part of this as artists was trying to understand what mechanisms do we have as human beings in different neighborhoods that allow us to come together and work in a kind of networked way, in a more microbiological way, if we look at Ficerum polycephalum. How do we share resources? We had a happening in a center called the Dennis Hurley Center, which is an organization that feeds about 300 people daily in the city of Durban. And there we looked at the growth of these two different cities, the microbiological growth against the demographics of those cities. And again, shared stories about food and ate the food from these different areas. This is the growth of those cities. So again, the neighborhood to the west, in this case, the less affluent neighborhood, really blanched and did not grow, where the neighborhood on the east grew and then started to explore. And again, as if we want to borrow the word from human populations, gentrify. While this application of nature systems elucidates human systems for us in new ways, we are also interested in integrating the two in material ways. As artists and technologists, we ask, what can we learn from the patterns sourced in microbiology? We also ask, what new systems can emerge from the combination of our human systems with nature-based systems? And I think this is a question that has come up across this conference, is how do we rethink our systems from different angles? And our angle, we are microbiology enthusiasts, as well as technologists and artists. And so we have conceived of a system that combines the networking of fungal systems and microbiological systems with our human technological systems. And we think about this in a broad sense of two internets intertwining or interacting with one another, that can learn from one another, that contribute to one another. And if we think of the human internet as a technological system with signals that can pass through the air and underground, a fungal system is not that different. And we hear more and more scientific studies coming out about the communication network that exists in nature through fungal systems, through the messages across mycelia and spores. We are also influenced by theories that insist that our technologies shape us in very real and fundamental ways. Willem Flusser is a philosopher who spurs us to think about our apparatuses and how they drive our ways of communicating and how those ways of communicating underlie our human values. Cesar Lois in Brazil, his area of study is Willem Flusser, and also the theories of media. And so we look at our socio-technical apparatuses through that lens. Our question is, what happens when the shape of our societal systems is derived from and incorporates and contributes back to the web of life? What happens when nature's model of growth asserts itself within our human systems? Not just the distribution of resources as modeled in the last project, but within our technological systems and within our human knowledge systems. This next project is called Degenerative Cultures. It creates a bi-hybrid network in which living microorganisms and AI work together. Books become the substrates for the growth of microbiological organisms on which an artificial intelligence is based. I'm going to share with you a 2-minute introduction to this project. degenerative cultures. It's based on different research that we have conducted into this history of thinking about nature that Cesar and I feel that we have also inherited. This is an essay from Cicero before the Common Era. We alone have the power of controlling the most violent of nature's offspring, the sea and the winds. We confine the rivers and straighten or divert their courses. By means of our hand, we create, as it were, a second world within the world of nature. With degenerative cultures, we attempt to critique this relationship between humanity and nature that's evident in the archive of these texts and also in the landscape. So we see this etching that is mirrored across different embodiments. And yet, it is not we alone that have the power to divert nature's course. Here there's a beaver dam that stays an oil spill. And this is a contemporary text, yet that still echoes Cicero. A network of deep and large channels can be dug in hot deserts, as hot as the Sahara. When these channels are connected with the seas and oceans, a network of water channels is created in those deserts. And in this way, the air temperature is shifted. This is an example of the text that our digital fungus, the AI, locates online, compiles into a database, and then corrodes. It corrodes those, it eats those texts based on the growth patterns that it observes in the living organism as it crawls across and redacts this text. Books that document the human impulse to control nature, they become the substrates for these organisms. The organism covers up these texts. The tweets that come out of this system represent a gradual redaction of the text, and in some ways of the human knowledge. The organism physically obscures the text, erasing and ultimately reformulating its content. This bihybrid installation came out of a conversation when we were contemplating how to enact a non-binary system, how to speak to your ecological worldview and many of your ecological worldviews and express a cooperation between human and nature-based systems. At one point, one of us asked the other, what if fungi could tweet? And because we're artists, our method was to propose that concept to an exhibition. And then because it was accepted, we had to figure out how to do it. And then we had this project. This next week, we're going to show this in Portugal, in Porto. And in October, it will be in Singapore. So it's traveling a little bit of the world, hopefully without too large of a carbon footprint. The digital component, the AI, is distinct from other artificial intelligences that are based on human neurology. Much of AI development is predicated on the idea that we want a superhuman. And our perspective attempts to shift this so that AI can reflect equitable microbiological systems and ideally make better systems that support not just humans, but entire ecosystems. We wonder if, since the nature-based system is inherently ecosystemic, if a technological system that learns from nature and makes decisions on behalf of human systems, if those decisions that result from a nature-originated logic would better serve the whole. Not just human societies, but nature and nature's nodes. This linked AI scours the internet, finds geoengineering and climate engineering texts, and then proceeds to consume those. There is an exchange between these two systems, the living organism and the digital fungus, They both tweet at the Twitter handle @HelloFungus, where users can mention the Twitter handle and prompt further corruption of the digital database. This is a readout on a receipt printer in the live installation of the Twitter feed. We, at one point, asked a literature class to look at this Twitter feed and analyze it. And what shocked us was the debate among the students and the conversation that ensued, really seeking agency and content and communication, and not questioning this idea that the AI was, not the AI actually, the fungus was trying to say something. And we have on our website, Cesar Lois, we have documentation of this analysis that I think is pretty compelling. It pushed us as artists to think differently about the literary outcome that the fungal reading produced. And we started to look at it. The last reading, this was in Brighton University. No, I'm sorry, the fungus was grown in Brighton University. And I say fungus very loosely because Physarum polycephalum is not officially a fungus, but since there's maybe no microbiologists in the room, I can get away with that. It was misnamed a fungus for a very long time because it acts like one, but it's not quite. This first text, or this last text by William Lugipen is a text on the aesthetics of Italian garden design. And we thought that landscape design books would be a good format for a living organism to comment on. The unadulterated text, the first tweet. So we have a camera that's reading the text and translates that image to OCR the way you might with a scanner. The very first text, unedited, is, by means of knowledge, man overcomes the determinism of nature and of natural processes. For it is through man's consciousness that nature and its processes are for man. Nevertheless, nature. The next fungal tweet, after 2% degeneration, so after the very first piece of growth, we can see that in this lighting it's a bit difficult to see the yellow begin to grow. There's one word that gets redacted. By means of knowledge, overcomes the determinism of nature. The first redacted word is the word man. And it was very difficult, it is very difficult not to assume some kind of intent in that. And later, the very last reading, the very last word that's left on the page, the final 3 tweets, before it's done, was determinism, determinism, determinism. It's a strong statement from Physarum polycephalum. And it's not invented. So, what is Physarum polycephalum saying to us? This is the database of the digital fungus. It reflects the slow degradation of the text over time that keeps growing. This database is growing of human-based predatory texts. As you can tell from the extensive amount of discussion that it takes to describe this artwork, degenerative cultures is conceptual, but it is also material. The process is not about making or enacting, it is about growing and nurturing. And as we make it, we cannot help but associate with the organisms that we nurture. This next project is a shift in that sense, where we really begin to think like an organism. This is called Thinking Like a Mushroom. In Thinking Like a Mushroom, human and fungal systems are layered in order to ask questions about how human knowledge and behavior relate to the knowledge embedded within nature. These are texts, books, on which we grow fungal systems. This was displayed at a gallery at A Ship in the Woods in Escondido. And timing a living sculpture for exhibition is not easy. Wanting a mushroom to bloom at a certain time is just crazy, and it's not necessarily the way you want to nurture organisms. But it is really rewarding. These were in full fruit for the exhibition opening, so the fungi were quite cooperative, true collaborators in this exhibition. So again, we are layering human and nature-based knowledge systems, growing mushrooms in books. This text is a dictionary, although most texts, including the next, were inherited by me from my grandfather. He was a philosopher whose focus was epistemology. And Cesar and I, having come from traditions of theory in different ways, really think about the inherited knowledge that we are cultivating, growing over. In this project, nature overrides and challenges that inherited knowledge, asserts another knowledge. This is a short excerpt from Thinking Like a Mushroom, in which we provide a meditation where Cesar Lois, so Cesar is Cesar Bayo, I represent Lois, lead participants through the process of thinking like a mushroom. So I will play for you a 1.5 minute introduction to the meditation, and I invite you as you listen to together think like a mushroom.
The fungus is reading Plato, or is Plato reading the fungus? Which represents knowledge, the mushroom or the book? What is knowledge, and how many kinds of knowledge can exist? Observe the conduits and the circuitry for environmental information passing within and through the fungal system. This mycelium bacinum.
Think with us.
Think like a mushroom.
You are smaller than you have ever been. Too small to see, too small to think like a human, that is. Float in this small state. You have no consciousness of yourself. You are only floating. Find a dark and cool environment. Here you begin to change form, spreading yourself until you encounter something larger than yourself. This is the root of a tree.
So this meditation is juxtaposed against living mushrooms growing on text in headphones. It is a more contemplative environment than this in a crowd. And the talk really walks viewers through thinking and then beginning to communicate and signal one another in different ways to carry a message of a tree, and then a message of a whole forest of trees, and then the message of whole groups of forests of trees, and going both smaller and scaling much larger. We imagine that thinking like a mushroom is the type of thinking that would populate Donna Haraway's interspecies worlding. She tells us it matters what ideas we use to think other ideas with. It also matters which human and non-neural intelligent networks, that is non-human networks, such as those sourced in nature, are intertwined in order for new ways of thinking to be possible. As Cesar Lois, we want to create art not just about, but within and with Jason Moore's web of life. Art with nature. Along these lines, there are some quotes that I collected yesterday. Jason Moore introduced the conference telling us that new ways of thinking are essential to imagining new futures. Matthew Siegel said we need to think of human creativity in a new way so that there is a continuity between what our bees are doing and what human beings are doing. We are trying in some way to do something like that. We see a future in which human systems are integrated with and support nature systems. Ours is a philosophical provocation, one of many assertions present today of planetary utopias, in order to combat our current capitalist dystopia. On that, I would leave my last word to nature and microbiology, which really is silent. So thank you.